Hello, everyone. My name is Elham Zanvakili, and I am an adjunct faculty here at CRC and ARC, and I teach English as a second language. I also would like to introduce my co-facilitator, who was a student in my class, Arzo Almju. We want to thank you so much for coming to this workshop, Learning to Dance with the Devil, a post-touring classroom project where I'll share an exploratory and experiential classroom study on how ChatGPT and human interaction shape reasoning and emotional development in ESL students. Please feel free to scan the QR code and share your ideas and reflections. So without further ado, let us begin. First, I want us to warm up for the dance. It's a strategy I use with students for emotional grounding. And this is part of the post-touring classroom framework. We ground human needs before cognitive performance. So please join me. Inhale, raise your arms up toward the sky, and slowly exhale, bring them down right in front of your chest and release. Let us begin the dance. Here is the overview of our presentation. I'll begin by sharing three key takeaways from my participation in TESOL 2025. Then I'll introduce the problem and the purpose of this study. And then I'll walk you through what actually happened in my ESL 31 classroom. After that, I'll explain the study design, research questions, and data collection. Next, I'll share the results, an integrated interpretation of the findings and implication for teaching. And finally, I'll close with future directions, Q&A, and discussion. This project began at TESOL 2025 across multiple sessions, three ideas kept coming up. First, AI clearly improves access, feedback, and language practice. Second, presenters were very clear that AI still lacks emotion, perspective taking, and cultural intuition. And third, the responsibility falls on us as educators to guide students to use AI consciously, not blindly. After the conference, I felt more confident exploring AI in my own ESL classroom, not just theoretically, but practically. Problem and context. AI is already um, being used by students, so the question is no longer whether, but how. What's often missing in AI discussions is the emotional and ethical side of learning. Students may trust AI tools like GPT, sometimes even more than human feedback, without fully understanding the differences. This creates a tension. Strong cognitive support, but limited emotional and ethical awareness. So, we must understand affective and cognitive differences. There are problems and challenges for both students and teachers. Many ESL students fear speaking. They feel judged, so they avoid risk taking. Confidence stays low and questions go unasked. At the same time, um, teachers are asking, how do we help students use AI responsibly? How do we reduce fear? How do we build cognitive, emotional, and ethical awareness? And how can AI help without replacing us? These questions didn't immediately lead me to think about a solution. They led me to a deeper problem. The deeper problem is that cognitive acceleration is outpacing emotional grounding. What these images represent is a growing imbalance. AI has accelerated Bloom's taxonomy, remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing. It supports speed, performance, and output. But emotional needs, as described by Maslow, don't accelerate at the same speed. In other words, cognition is racing ahead while emotional grounding lags behind. AI has not grown emotionally, does not develop a sense of belonging, empathy, ethical awareness, or responsibility on its own. So this imbalance creates risk. In the classroom, this creates tension. Some students may perform well by leaning heavily on AI, sometimes in ways that border on unethical. Not necessarily because they intend to cheat, but because they are under cultural and academic pressure and lack ethical and emotional grounding and awareness. So, the deeper challenge is how to cultivate Maslow's hierarchy and Bloom's to create a balance and beat the devil. Building on that imbalance, this slide introduces the problem of study. It is inspired by Alan Turing's original question, can machines think? A question that focused primarily on cognition. Reframed for education and ESL, my guiding question became, can AI tools like GPT help ESL students think, feel, reason, and communicate more consciously? Following Maslow's hierarchy, I approached this not as a solution, but as a lens to explore emotional and sociocultural grounding influences on how students engage with cognitive tools like GPT. So this study is designed to analyze what happens when emotional development and accelerated cognition coexist in the same learning environment. So in ESL 31, I explored how AI and human dialogue together shape learning. And most importantly, how can AI support learning without replacing human empathy? This slide captures the core idea, what I call the post-Turing classroom. As I mentioned, AI can already match or even surpass Bloom's taxonomy at the cognitive level. It can help students practice, analyze, create, but AI is still non-sentient. It's non-embodied. It has no lived experience, um, even though it's now everywhere. In a post-Turing classroom, learning has to be grounded first in Maslow's hierarchy, the body, emotional safety, love and belonging, motivation, and ethics. So, if cognition is no longer uniquely human, then education must recenter what AI cannot inhabit. But how? Everything I have shared so far has been the conceptual foundation, the problem, the tension, and the theoretical framing. What comes next is not a solution. It is an initial step, a way of translating those ideas into classroom practice. You can think of this as a first experiment for what a post-Turing classroom might look like when we take emotional and sociocultural grounding as seriously as cognitive performance. So here is a quick snapshot of the learning context. The project took place in ESL 31, a high beginner to intermediate listening and speaking course with 22 multilingual community college students. Over the semester, students moved through 6 advisor phases, and in each phase they interacted with one real campus advisor and also with GPT around the same real-life communication task. So the goal was not to test accuracy or decide which one was better. It was to create space for comparison, reflection, and awareness, especially around emotion, clarity, realism, and human connection in communication. This design allowed students to experience both forms of interaction side by side and then reflect on how each shaped their thinking and feelings. Here's what happened in the classroom. 6 campus advisors visited our class. Police officer, career services, mental health, physical health, technology, and financial aid. And for each advisor, students went through a full communication cycle. They prepared questions, interacted with them, and then explored the same questions with GPT. I want to briefly explain why these 6 advisors were chosen. First, they represent culturally embedded roles that ESL students regularly encounter in US higher education. Second, these are some of the most commonly used campus support services. So the interactions were realistic and meaningful. Third, they allowed students to practice communication in authentic, real world context where emotion, power, and stakes are present. And finally, together, these advisors or services address students' core needs: mental health, physical health, safety, technology, and especially financial stress, which is a major concern for many community college students. So, by inviting these advisors, we are grounding Maslow's hierarchy in everyday experiences of students. And this is where theory meets practice. This slide outlines the learning cycle for each of the advisor or services. Preparation before class focused on early materials or former ESL library, completed primarily at home with occasional in-class practice. Students worked on language preparation related to six advisors, including vocab and grammar, and developed Aristotle's WH questions: what, when, where, how, why, and who. On the guest visit day, class began with short yoga and breathing exercises to support emotional grounding and focus. And 30 minutes before the guest arrived, students engage in guided Q&A using Aristotle WH questions. They worked in small groups to refine their questions and reach agreement on which questions each group would ask. During the guest interaction, students practice real-life speaking by interviewing the guest. And the session was recorded and posted later that day on Canvas. After class at home, students listened to class recording, focused on key ideas or transcription. Then they completed a GPT role play using the exact same prompt given to the human advisor. For example, hey GPT, you are a financial aid advisor at the college and talking to ESL 31 students. And then students use the same WH questions and interaction structure. Then they compared similarities and differences and identified patterns between the advisors and GPT. And finally completed a survey and a reflection focused on metacognitive and meta-affective learning. This slide shows the full learning experience at a glance. The same cycle was repeated 6 times, once for each advisor. So I'm not explaining each step again, but this is the structure that held the entire experience together. Based on this learning cycle, the study was guided by 4 research questions. First, we asked how students emotionally and cognitively experience GPT compared to human advisors. Not just what they learn, but how um, they feel and think during the interaction. Second, we examined how students evaluate communication quality, including clarity, realism, understanding, and support. And third, we looked at whether patterns were consistent across different advisors. And finally, we explored how students reflect on confidence, emotion, and reasoning after engaging with both AI and humans. And together, these questions allowed us to examine not just performance, but experience across emotional, cognitive, and communicative dimensions. And here I explain how um, we collected the data. Qualitative data came from students' comparison tasks, reflection paragraph, and open-ended survey responses. And quantitative data came from structured surveys after each advisor, focusing on emotions, understanding, realism, clarity, and AI versus human comparisons. For data analysis, I use a mixed method approach. Qualitatively, I use thematic analysis to identify recurring emotional learning patterns in students' reflections and responses, and quantitatively, we conducted descriptive and comparative analysis to examine differences between AI and human interactions. From here, I'll present the results in three steps. First, qualitative patterns from student reflections, then quantitative survey trends, and finally, I'll integrate both to show how emotional experience and learning outcomes come together. Five core qualitative themes emerged from the study, and I'll allow Arzu Almju to explain this section to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Arzu Alamju and I am very happy and honored to be here today. I'm presenting this work as a student and I would like to say thank you to dear Professor Ilham Zanwakili for giving me this opportunity. She is my professor and I really appreciate her support and guidance. Today I will share with you five main themes that came from this study. Theme 1 is about emotional safety with AI. Students say ChatGPT feels safe, patient, and not judgmental. This helps them feel relaxed and less afraid of making mistakes. Some say they were not scared because ChatGPT does not judge them or look at them, and AI was a safe place to practice speaking. It reduced fear and stress, so students were more willing to speak and try longer answers, especially shy and beginner students. GPT can support students emotionally, but it cannot replace real human interactions. Theme 2 is about the human experience. Students felt strong emotions when talking to real people. Some felt nervous because the person looked at them or confused because they spoke fast. But they liked that advisor gave real life examples. Human interactions feel real and intense. It has social pressure, fast speech, and real emotions, which AI cannot copy. This is why human advisors are very important for real communication and social understanding. Theme 3 is about using AI and humans together. Students say they use ChatGPT first to practice, then talk to human advisor to understand them better. They felt human answers were real and ChatGPT helped them prepare and understand. Students use AI as a low risk, practice, space, and humans for real feedback and confirmation. This shows that AI does not replace humans. AI and humans work together to help learning. Theme 4 is about growth and emotion words. Students use more emotion words in their reflections like nervous, relaxed, confident, shy, confused, stressed, calm, and proud. When a student say, now I can say when I feel nervous and why. This shows they moved from simple words like good or bad to more clear emotion words. It means students grow in emotion literacy, not just language skills. Using AI and humans together help. They are social and emotional learning and ESL classes. Theme 5 is about awareness. Students reflect on what they learn, how they learn, and how it felt. They say ChatGPT was polite, but the human was direct. And after practice, I felt more confident. This shows students learn to recognize and name their emotions and manage them better. It connects with the post-touring classroom framework, which focus on thinking skills and emotion awareness. In the end, this was my own magical experience. I learned that Talking to human advisor can be confusing, but practicing with ChatGPT at home helped me feel relaxed and get better results. AI made it easier to practice and understand. Thank you so much for your attention to my presentation today.
Here I'm going to present a table that explains the contributions of each advisor and learning outcomes one by one. With the police officer, students reported feeling nervous, and that nervousness matters. It wasn't a failure, it reflected the authenticity of the interaction. So students were better able to manage and cope under pressure, or at least they learned to do that. For the career advisor, students repeatedly mentioned motivation and hope. Um, Through midterm projects, students improve their resume, and this is where professional identity language began to feel real rather than abstract. With the mental health advisor, students described interaction as the most comfortable. She started by emotional grounding and shared personal stories and explicitly said things like, let's do some inhaling and exhaling. So students felt relaxed during the session. AI only shared simple steps, but human empathy and nuance here enabled real emotional expression and help seeking. In physical health, students described interaction as comfortable and informative. AI supported body, vocabulary, and symptom description, while the human advisor added some cultural nuance that made communication more accurate. The technology advisor was valued for practical campus tech information. AI's step-by-step guidance supported digital literacy, while the human advisor introduced real troubleshooting constraints. And together, this combination increased students' digital confidence. And finally, the financial aid advisor was the most impactful overall. Students showed the strongest engagement because financial concerns are immediate and personal. When the advisor shared her own story as a former ESL student who started at a community college, it created a powerful sense of connection. But AI's patients help students rehearse FAFSA and budgeting language, but it was the human story that transformed the language into trust and relevance. So across all advisor types, we saw a consistent and structural pattern. GPT offered structured language, step-by-step guidance, vocab rehearsal, but human advisors contributed domain-specific realism that the students clearly responded to emotionally and cognitively. So AI increases speed, reduces fear, and supports rehearsal and analysis, and human provide credibility, emotion, and lived context. And these are the core themes across phases: safety with AI, that lowers affective filter, authenticity with humans that builds real emotional resilience, linguistic growth that strengthens pragmatic use in real contexts, critical reflection, increases tone awareness and metacognition, emotional literacy that integrates socio-emotional learning into um, English as a second language instruction, and meta affective awareness that supports emotional self regulation during high stakes interaction. Looking at pre post data, students showed meaningful gains in speaking and listening confidence and clear reductions in stress. The median speaking stress dropped from 5 to 3, and also their emotional response shifted from nervous to confident. Most of the students mentioned that. So students didn't just feel better, they became more confident and less anxious when using English. And these findings suggest that GPT did not replace human interaction. Instead, it functioned as a scaffold, providing some emotional safety, practice, and confidence. So it brought some stability when it came to speaking and listening, and it supported learning, but not dependency, and it supported growth. by reducing fear of mistakes. And this section presents the quantitative findings given the small sample size of 22 students. These results are exploratory rather than confirmatory or complementary of the qualitative results. So the purpose is not to generalize, but to identify emerging patterns that complement the qualitative findings and point to directions for future research. This slide shows students' emotional responses, and it presents results from the questionnaire that students completed after each advisor interaction. For every session, students answered parallel questions. How did you feel when you talked with the human advisor, and how did you feel when you talked with the GPT advisor? And they were allowed to select multiple emotions. The emotional categories included happy, nervous, relaxed, confident, confused, and shy. So I used a funnel graph to visually emphasize differences in emotional responses. The y-axis here lists the emotional types, and the values on each bar represent percentages, and each color represents the same emotional type across both conditions, human versus GPT. For example, blue represents relax. So students felt 33% relax while interacting with GPT, and 18.6% relax while interacting with human advisor. And here is a summary table to show direction and magnitude of change between GPT and human advisors. Students in general felt more relaxed and happier and more confident when interacting with GPT. And in contrast, confusion, nervousness, and shyness were more strongly associated with human advisors. So AI appears to create a safe entry point, while human interaction brings richer but more demanding emotional experiences. This slide presents results from another set of questions that the students completed. One of the questions focused on emotional expression. This bar graph compares median ratings of emotional expression between human advisors and GPT advisors. Blue bars represent human advisors, and orange bars represent GPT advisors. The x-axis lists the advisors, and the y-axis allows the median rating. So as you can see, mostly human advisors were rated higher for emotional expression, especially financial and police advisor. And this difference reflects students' perception that human advisor conveyed emotion through tone of voice, facial expressions, spontaneous reactions, and sharing of personal stories, whereas GPT's responses, while informative and procedural, were experienced as more emotionally neutral. For detail quality, students were asked how many examples did the advisors gave. Humans were also rated higher overall, especially financial aid and career advisor, where advice depends heavily on personal experience, storytelling, and contextual judgment. However, there is no gap in technology and physical health. So, in general, humans are perceived as stronger in emotional and detailed guidance, especially in personal or high impact domains. This bar graph compares median ratings of realism between human advisors and GPT advisors. Students were asked questions: how realistic did the advisor feel? Students rated human advisors higher for realism across all domains, describing their advice as authentic, grounded, and based on lived experience. And ChatGPT's realism ratings were lower, and this effect was especially strong, as you can see, for mental health advisor, where a caring tone and personal story sharing made the interaction feel emotionally authentic. And in contrast, GPT responses were seen as accurate but generic and scripted. And turning to language clarity, students were asked how easy and clear was the advisor's language. We see the opposite pattern. Students consistently rating GPT higher for clarity across all advisors. GPT responses were described as clear, structured, predictable, and easy to follow, which was especially supportive for ESL learners. And as you can see, only for the physical health advisor, this effect was equal, where both advisors provided specific, concise, and to the point medical information. So overall, humans provide realism and emotional authenticity, while GPT provides clarity and linguistic support. And together, they create a balanced pathway from safe practice to authentic communication. And the AI pathway shows students typically start with emotional safety. They feel relaxed. That leads to positive engagement, then confidence with only mild confusion and very low anxiety. And GPT creates a low pressure space where students feel safe to practice. The human pathway shows that students often begin happy and engaged, but then quickly it introduces nervousness and social vulnerability, such as feeling shy. Confidence does develop, but it's conditional and requires effort. And the key point is that this isn't good versus bad. AI supports safety and practice, while human interaction introduces productive challenge that leads to deeper learning and resilience. The strongest learning happens when students experience both. This slide shows what human advisors uniquely offer: real-time interaction, natural conversation, sociocultural and emotional nuance, and real-world judgment. So they introduce productive socio-emotional tension, which students identified as meaningful and essential for real life communication. Despite emotional differences, students reported feeling understood at very similar levels by both human advisors and GPT across all domains. And this suggests that GPT is able to interpret students' questions and intentions comparably to humans, at least from the learner's perspective. And also, in the post-survey findings, students reported strong benefits from yoga and breathing for emotional regulation and very positive experiences with group work. And this shows that emotional safety was supported holistically and collaboratively. Most students reported that early lessons were very helpful or somewhat helpful for developing their language skills, and this suggests that structure, scaffolded preparation played an important role in supporting students' confidence and readiness before live interactions. And we see that a vast majority of students use AI tools creatively in their final presentations. They were wonderful when they were presenting their final projects. So together, these results suggest that when students are grounded with human design materials and clear expectations, they engage with AI more intentionally rather than dependently. And finally, when asked what they learned, most students uh, what was their preference of the materials. Most of them preferred a blend of materials rather than online only instruction, reinforcing the importance of balanced human-centered course design. And this slide marks the end of the quantitative result presentation. Learning happens most deeply in the space between comfort and challenge. Students displayed metacognitive and meta-affective maturity, awareness of how they feel and think. They could describe why they felt confident or anxious, and this dual exposure created the strongest learning gains. In conclusion, findings revealed that students did not simply use GPT as a tool, they engaged in reflective dialogue with both AI and human advisors. Through comparison, they developed emotional literacy, awareness, and ethical reasoning. And this suggests that educational value of AI lies not in automation, but in intentional, human-judged in integration. Next, I'm going to share pedagogical insights, implication, and future directions. These findings align strongly with established learning theories. For Maslow, emotional safety was intentionally cultivated through emotional grounding exercises, including yoga, and the use of AI for creating the feeling of emotional safety, which helped students feel calm and safe in the classroom, and they supported confidence, engagement, and risk-taking. For Bloom, AI primarily supported lower order thinking, practice, and clarification, while human interaction supported higher order thinking of both Bloom and Maslow, meaning making, collaboration, love, and belonging. And for Krashen, both the grounding exercises and AI practice lowered the affective filter, reduce anxiety, increase willingness to take risks, and participate more. From a task-based perspective, following Ellis, advisor interactions created authentic, goal-driven communication in real-world roles. From a sociocultural perspective, following Vygotsky, human advisors provided emotional, pragmatic, and cultural scaffolding that AI could not replicate, and students learned through collaboration. In line with Kurzweil, AI functioned as cognitive augmentation, not replacement, guided by human values. So as a result, students developed AI literacy, learning when to rely on AI and when human judgment matters most. And here are the pedagogical implications for ESL classroom. Findings suggest AI as a rehearsal space and exploration for low-stake practice at home, class time for performance, presentation, um, peer assessment, peer feedback, guest speakers for authenticity, and for encouraging reflection, critical thinking, and analysis, AI versus human comparison. Um, Also, storytelling that empowers qualitative research and building emotional vocabulary explicitly, and reflections focus on feelings. And faculty could be mentors, helping students become emerging researchers and presenters, and exploring multiple tools altogether to build smarter learning for everyone. Future directions. I use the phrase learning to dance with the devil very intentionally. AI is unchecked power without awareness, grounding, or direction. And as I learned, a helpful parallel analogy is nuclear energy. It can be used to destroy or to generate electricity and sustain life. The same technology works the same way. This is especially important in ESL context because our students are going through a double acculturation process now. First, they are adjusting to US academic and social culture, language, norms, expectations, power relationships, and at the same time, they're also, like all of us, adjusting to a new AI culture. How knowledge is produced, how authority works, and how communication happens, and where humans fit in that system. So this is not just a student issue. We are all learning this together. The post-Turing classroom recognizes that learning after AI is not only cognitive, it is emotional, cultural, ethical, and relational. And the goal is not fear or blind adoption, but guided exploration. Um, Learning to dance with the devil means balancing safety with reality, comfort with challenge, and efficiency with humanity, so that AI becomes a tool for growth rather than a force that overwhelms or replaces us. And this is where I introduce the post-Turing classroom framework and meta self-learning model. Here you can see the post-Turing classroom and meta self-learning model that are developed based on Maslow's hierarchy. For the past century in education, we have emphasized Bloom's taxonomy, higher order thinking, analysis, evaluation, STEM, and ignored emotions. We ignored humanism, culture, morality, and EQ. But what this project shows is that Bloom and Turing cannot function well without Maslow and meta self-development. If students do not feel emotionally safe, culturally respected, or psychologically grounded, higher order learning simply does not activate. So Maslow's hierarchy must be addressed through human-centered pedagogy, resulting in the post-Turing classroom and meta self-learning model. Instead of treating learning as purely cognitive, we recognize that the students are developing across multiple interconnected domains: somatic, body-mind awareness, affective, creating positive feelings, and sociocultural, connecting with the students and creating a sense of belonging, and ethical, cognitive, situative. So to apply a post-Turing classroom, we must intentionally cultivate these domains and not just cognition. So the final takeaway is that the dance is a balance, and when educators and students lead and choreograph the dance, AI just becomes a tool. And this is almost the end of my presentation. So these are the works that collectively are the key sources of my study. And I would like to say that this project was deeply collaborative. I want to acknowledge the people who made this project possible. First, my dear students who received certificates recognizing their effort, persistence, and willingness to engage with challenge. This work would not exist without their courage and commitment. Also sincerely thank the campus service professionals, police, career, mental health, physical health, technology, and financial aid for their valuable time and support. I'm grateful to Dean Emmanuel Sigake for his encouragement and institutional support, and Chair Jenna Francisco for her continuing support. I also thank Dr. Fairuze Ahmed, a dear colleague who led a class session on pedagogical uses of AI. And this work was supported by innovation grant funders whose support made the project possible. And finally, I thank Dr. Omid Zanvakili for his statistical expertise and guidance that strengthened the analysis. Thank you for your time and your engagement. I am open to questions and reflections. Please feel free to scan the QR code and share your thoughts. I hope you have a wonderful day.